Do aliens exist, and are they among us? Are weird creatures lurking in the darkness? Do evil entities hide in the shadows of your bedroom while you sleep? Join us as we explore all this and more on the Warped Reality Podcast.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Warped Reality Paranormal Podcast, Season 6, Bonus Episode 1, and this one is a good one, everybody. We finally got an awesome segment. Well, not finally got an awesome segment, but we finally have received a new segment of awesomeness from Mr. John Wright. And it's amazing, man. You're going to love this episode. He does an amazing job on breaking down a lot of the UFO theories, the main players in this situation, and evidence and all sorts of great stuff. You're going to really love this episode, man. So definitely sit down, drink some cut waters on our behalf, on mine and Creepy Ken's behalf, and enjoy the show. We also have the awesome segment, Horrible Reviews with Edgegrave Dave, where he goes into his experience visiting the Brighton Asylum. I'm not sure if he was actually admitted or if he went there, for whatever, but I guess we're going to find out together, guys. So let's listen to it. On with the show.
Good evening. You are entering a dimension where up is down, good is evil, and day is night. You've just made a wrong turn into the right headspace.
Hey everybody, this is my first episode in a long time. My apologies for such a long layoff. It's kind of a hectic summer. So today I'm going to start talking about a presentation that I did a little while ago. And this was during the UFO fair. And I know it was kind of funny. There were some people there that knew I was presenting, and there were a lot of people that weren't there that never got the chance to hear me talk about this. So the whole idea was, if I'm going to do this presentation for not for the museum, so this is from my standpoint alone. My opinions are my opinions. They're not the opinions of MUFON. They're not the opinions of the museum or any other group that I might be affiliated with. And I'll throw in Joe, I'll throw in Ed, Nat, Ken, all the other guys that are part of Warped Reality. So this is my opinion alone. And the presentation was more about trying to inform people than it was anything else. This wasn't necessarily about me trying to debunk. It was more to encourage people to be very critical when it comes to the thinking process and when they hear some of this information. So this is entitled, Are UFOs and Aliens Real? The Empirical and Anecdotal Evidence Supporting Their Existence. So in the world of ufology, there's kind of this major debate. Are UAPs, UFOs, whatever the hell you want to call them, aliens, are they real? If you ask the average person, you're probably going to receive a variety of answers. Obviously, some people are going to believe, some people aren't, some people kind of on the fence. So it all depends on who you talk to. I think the more important question that we should be asking, or the questions we should be asking, are, is there evidence to support the idea that these things are real? How reliable is that evidence? And then the last question, how has that evidence impacted our views on UFOs? So the question is, why the debate? In my opinion, some people lack the ability to be objective, while others are more concerned with money and clicks instead of truth. And what's funny is I was talking about this at the fair, and there was a gentleman that was paid to be there to do a speech, and you've probably seen him on one of those History Channel shows, which I will not name because of the fact that I think it's a total grift, and the fact that they're researching and looking and doing all this stuff, but they never, ever come to any conclusions, because if they ever do come to a conclusion, well, there goes the money train. Anyway, so what's the first step that we have to take here? I think the first step that we need to take is we have to come to some sort of agreement on what counts as evidence. I'm not holding my breath on that one, because I don't think we're ever really going to come to an agreement, in part because, like I said before, some people are just not very objective about it. They have their beliefs. They refuse to let go of those beliefs. And the other part, like I said, because of the money making that can be generated by this particular topic. For this presentation, as I said before, I'm going to look at what's empirical and what is called anecdotal evidence. So let's start with what is empirical. So empirical evidence is something that's physical, something that's material object that can be tested in a lab. Now, some different things that you can look at. So some things that they mention here are evidence that is obtained through systematic observation, measurements, or experimentation. So you can use like surveys. You can look at what they refer to as cross-sectional data, which is collected from a population over a specified time, which kind of gives you a snapshot of some stuff. You got observational data, which is collected by scientists through observing and making notes about some of the different tests that they're doing. And we could also look at what we refer to as cultural artifacts. And these are collected from potential site, whether we're talking about in the historical sense, or we're talking about sites in regards to some of these different events like Roswell and some of the other stuff that goes with it. Now, what's anecdotal? Anecdotal is evidence in the form of stories that people tell about what's happened to them. The absence of empirical evidence, meaning nothing physical, means that this can't be proven. So for the most part, it's just stories. And if you go through and take a look, 99.9% of the evidence that's out there is all based on anecdotal evidence. So it's all based on stories, and there's really not a whole lot that you can do to back that up. Now, is there actual empirical evidence? No. There is no past evidence. There is no current empirical evidence. And yeah, I know people will say, oh, well, so-and-so found this and gave the chunk of whatever to so-and-so. And the problem is none of those things ever get backed up. You got Bob Lazar, who I'm not a big fan of, talks about element 15. He's got it stashed someplace, blah, blah, blah. You know what, dude? If you want to end the argument about this whole thing, produce one tiny piece of element 115 so that it can be tested, and then bang, you prove what you wanted to prove this whole entire time. But again, I don't think he's legit, and I don't think he has anything, and the only way he can stay significant is if he keeps stringing people along. Now, the only thing that we can kind of look at as far as anything that might be considered or comes even close to being something along the lines of empirical evidence are, well, in more some recent history, spy balloons. You had the Chinese spy balloons, 4 of them, whatever, got shot down like a year ago. The only other thing that people can offer as any other type of empirical evidence is radar hits. Well, one of the problems with radar hits is those things can be spoofed. There's a lot of stuff that's out there. And again, because some of our systems are so sophisticated, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it's the F-22. The F-22's radar systems are so sophisticated that they can pick up from almost 100 miles away a baseball-sized piece of metal. Well, if they can pick up a baseball-sized piece of metal that's in the air out there, they're going to be hitting on a lot of stuff. And I know there were the videos that came out from Corbell and all this other crap, and some of those wound up turning out to be Mylar balloons. It's amazing what our technology can pick up on. So anyway, I'm going to continue on because I got some other stuff within the presentation itself. Now, unfortunately, any evidence supporting the existence of aliens or alien craft is just purely anecdotal, and we have to take people at their word. So here's the problems that I have with that. Number one, memory is fallible, meaning over time, the way things may have occurred when the event originally occurred, it's going to change in your mind over time. The more evidence that you or more information that you become aware of is going to start to change. I don't want to use the term warp, but it's going to start to change the way that you remember things. And I've seen this with my parents as they've gotten older. Both my parents are in their 80s, and there's certain things that they talk about, and they're like, oh, I remember. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, that didn't happen. You got 2 different events kind of jammed together there. This happened here and this happened there. And oh, yeah, you know what? You're right. So memory is fallible. The other thing is these people could be lying. There are people that just straight up are looking for attention and making up stories. Why? Because they want that attention. Or they could be lying because they're trying to sell some stuff. The other thing is misidentifications. So people might see something, but they may have misidentified it as a UFO or a UAP. As I tell my students, if you're going to make a claim, you need to support it. So here's what I did. I've included a small number of what I call the most well-known cases used to kind of buoy the claim that UFOs and aliens exist. For each case, I'm going to explain why I believe that they are poor examples of corroborating evidence. Now, one of the first and foremost, and I know I'll probably catch a lot of shit because of this, is a gentleman by the name of Jesse Marcel. Everybody should know this guy because of Unsolved Mysteries episode and his connection to Stanton Friedman, who I know as a MUFON member, I should be like putting this dude up on a pedestal and praising him. I'm not a big Stanton Friedman fan, so I'm just throwing that one out there. Anyway, what do we know about Jesse Marcel? He shows up on that TV show, and he's the guy that starts making all these crazy-ass claims. So what I'm going to tell you is, and again, I'm just going to stick to some of them. I'm not going to go through all of them because, again, I'm going to do my best to try and keep this as concise as I can. Just about all of the claims that he makes are proven to be false. Now, the guy that you have to look up the website called roswellfiles.com. And the gentleman's name is Robert Todd. What Robert Todd did was a series of posts that he had made. And it's a section called Cal Flop Quarterly. So you can look that up. You should be able to, that should be enough of a search to kind of bring you to that point where you'll be able to find the information. Now, within those 4 different papers or newsletters that he produces, he talks about all the major claims, and he talks about using the FOIA process to pull information to find out whether or not this guy is telling the truth. Now, one of the first claims that he makes is that he had 3,000 hours of flying as a pilot. Now, one of the things that Robert was able to pull up was his application, meaning Jesse Marcel's application for appointment, and this was in January of 1942. They also were able to find, or he was also able to find, classification questionnaire reserve officers, February of 1942. Now, in that, it asks for any relevant experience, things along those lines, so that this way they can best figure out what this guy might be able to do. The only thing that is mentioned in there is that he liked doing photography, he did community plays in his hometown, and he was employed by a Shell oil company for making maps. And what he would do is look at the photos of whatever it was that they had flown over and taken pictures of, and then he would produce maps based upon those photos. The second claim that he makes is that while he was in the service, he served as a waist gunner on I think it was a B-17. He was a bombardier, and he was also a pilot. Then he goes on to say that he shot down over the course of the war 5 enemy planes. Well, if you shoot down 5 enemy planes, that makes you an ace, and then that would be notified somewhere because you get a medal, honors, all the other stuff that goes along with it. Now, based on what is referred to as the military occupation specialty information, Marcel would have taken part in combat flights, but he was only there as an intelligence officer. His job was to assess damage to targets that had been hit and to also identify future targets that could be hit. Nothing in his personnel file shows that he had any training whatsoever. Now, if you've ever seen the bomb sight that was used during World War II, it was a sophisticated piece of material. And you had to basically train for months on end to work with that targeting site in order to be able to use that thing. Now, as far as heavy weapons, again, you look at his personnel file, there's nothing in there saying that he was trained as a heavy weapons personnel. My grandfather, he fought in World War II. Originally, when he signed up, he was he went in and he was supposed to be anti-aircraft gunner. So he had training with heavy weaponry. And the problem is, by the time he got over to Europe in late 42 or whatever it was, most of the planes had pretty much been shot down and they needed guys to go into tanks. So what they wound up doing was taking him and moving him over, retraining him so that he would be able to be in the tank. Over time, and I have his discharge papers, which show all this information. Over time, he worked his way up from like the guy who used to load the cannon to, he was the assistant driver and then eventually became cannoneer, which is the guy that does the target sighting and the shooting within the tank itself. So it shows it on there, the training that he had over the course of his career. None of this shows up on Jesse Marcel's. Now, the only thing that you could take a look at and say, okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he did fly this thing at some point. One of the things that they did do within the Army during this time frame was drills. So the pilots, what they would do is every flight that they would go out during either the beginning of the flight, the end of the flight, somewhere in there, they would do what they called incapacitated pilot training. So in a situation where the pilot might be shot, whatever, he can no longer fly the plane. Well, who's going to fly the plane if nobody else knows how to do it? So one of the things that they would do is they would make sure on every flight, every guy in that plane had the basics of how to get the thing to go up, how to get the thing to go down, how to slow it down, how to speed it up, so that this way, if the pilot or the co-pilot were incapacitated, somebody else could actually get in there and fly the plane and potentially land it. If you go through and take a look at the statistics, there were several times where this came in very handy and wound up allowing these planes and the crew to survive so that they could make their way back home. Now, as far as firing the heavy weapons or a tail gunner or a waist gunner, whatever you want to call it, I know I've spoken to people who were in the military. In this case, it wasn't necessarily somebody who was in the Air Force. This was a gentleman who was in the Navy. And he said prior to them coming back into shore, like when they were out in the international waters, he said every once in a while to lighten up the ship, depending upon which port they were coming into, they would fire off some ammo. So they would get the guns out, like the machine guns, stuff like that, and just start practicing using that equipment so that this way they had some experience with it. And it wasn't going to be, like in the thick of fighting, that would be their first experience with using that type of stuff. So it's one of those things where, all right, one guy gets shot, one guy goes down, but we need somebody to plug a hole for the waist gunner or the tail gunner or something like that. You have the training, you know how to load, reload, how to do all those different things. So granted, those are possibilities. Now, the third statement that I'm going to include in this is that he said he had a bachelor's degree in physics from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He also went on to claim that he had attended the University of Wisconsin, that he attended Ohio State University, that he attended LSU, and that he also attended NYU. When you go through, take a look on his forms, he will state that he attended LSU for 1 year. And the pertinent information, it just says he was a special student. I'm not quite sure what that means, but whatever. In a later form, he states that he attended for 1.5 years and that the courses that he took were non-credited courses. So maybe he did audit. I don't know. In any case, Robert Todd did some deep researches. So he contacts the records department at LSU, and he will also contact the records department at George Washington University. He does 2 searches for each place. So he calls up, he does a search. They give him the information. So LSU said, yeah, no, we don't have any record of him attending here. So Robert Todd waits like another 2 months, and he calls back again, and he asks, can you do a search for Jesse Marcel, blah, 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 and nothing shows up for him. So then he does the same exact thing with George Washington University. At that point, he never even bothered to look at the other schools because the previous 2, one of them, the one that he had the most information about, had absolutely nothing about this guy ever attending those schools. So another false statement. Number 4, if you've watched the Unsolved Mysteries episode, then you've seen him say, I was acquainted with virtually every type of weather observation or radar tracking device being used by either the civilians or the military. It was definitely not a weather or tracking device. And then you also hear him say something, it was not of this earth. Okay, so what do we know? Marcel's file shows that he attended the Radar Intelligence Officer's course August 45 to September of 45. Now, what does that cover? That covers basic radar scope interpretation. It covers radar navigation, target study. It covers mission planning, aircraft recognition, and then radar countermeasures and scope photography. Notice that none of these things ever dealt with weather balloons or radar targets. Now, what are radar targets? These are the things that were used during that time frame where they would run these big balloons, these balloon chains, massive, some of them reaching like 150, 200 feet in height and length. And what they would do is put these radar targets on there, and they would use radars on the ground, shoot the radar signal at these, and then what they could do is use those to determine speed and direction at the different altitudes so that they could either use this for if they wanted to do some type of bomb tests or things like that. So this way they could figure out which way the wind was blowing. If it was blowing in a particular direction, like toward a populated area, well, you know what? Then maybe you don't do it, right? So you have all these different things going on. Now, they also have what are referred to as sounding balloons. Now, this is part of a program that was referred to as Project Mogul. The idea was this, that you could send these microphones up into the air and that these microphones would actually be able to capture sound of the Russians testing nuclear bombs. So at this point, we had this agreement that we were going to slow down the testing, all this other stuff. And there's really no way that you could keep track of who's doing this during that time frame. So I can't remember the scientist, but there was a scientist who figured out that you could do this underwater. And if you remember when the little submersible that wound up sinking when it went to see the Titanic, there were sonar beacons under the water that were miles upon miles away from where this thing took place. And they wound up catching on microphone the moment that thing imploded. Because the idea was there's a layer of water in which sound can actually easily pass through from one area to another, and they believe this is also how whales are able to communicate with one another. So that turned into another idea, which was, well, if it works underwater, is it possible that that can also work in the air? So that's what led to them creating these things. So the material found by Mac Brazel, who's the guy who is known for being the rancher that found the quote-unquote saucer, this was what he found on his ranch. And it was identified by Professor Charles Moore, who was a gentleman at NYU, and it was identified by him as that of a sounding balloon. Now, what does that mean? Sounding balloons were, at that point, a very new program. It had just been initiated. And the only people that knew about it were the people at Alamogordo Airfield, and because that's where they flew them out of, these what they refer to as quote-unquote flights. That's where they flew them out of. And the people from NYU, so the professors, the engineers, and all that stuff, the people who were designing these things. So those were the only people that ever would have been able to identify the sounding balloons because they're the only ones that knew what these things looked like. Now, what's the difference? The difference is the sounding balloons used slightly different materials in order to make these balloons go a little bit higher, stay up a little bit longer, so that this way they would be able to catch some sort of sound. Now, as I said, the only personnel that wouldn't be able to identify it is the people from Alamogordo. Now, if you noticed, when they talk about this in the thing, he talks about, well, so-and-so and all this other stuff and blah, blah, blah. What it comes down to is the people at Roswell, where the stuff was taken to, would not have been able to identify this stuff. Now, there's some other things that I can get into with all this, but again, I'm going to touch on this in another segment that's going to be just strictly about Roswell. And hint, hint, it's probably could have been a damper on what most people think about the Roswell crash. In any case, the only other people that would have been able to identify that is the people at Wright Patterson. Excuse me. No, they would not have been able to identify it. It only would have been Alamogordo and NYU. So scratch that. Now, the next guy I bring up is Commander David Fravor. Now, most of you guys probably remember this guy because of what happened back in 2004. So Commander Fravor, Navy retired. He was the leader of a squadron called the Black Aces. He and his wingman, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, also Navy retired, took part in naval exercises off of San Diego in 2004. So this is off of San Diego, off of the area called Catalina Island. And it is also referred to as the Tic Tac. So this is the incident in which all this stuff kind of comes out. Now, Since 2017, Commander Fravor has appeared on TV shows like Unidentified with one of my favorite people, Lou Elizondo, sarcasm. And he's also appeared in news articles. He's appeared on podcasts, and he's also testified before Congress. Now, as far as claims are concerned, he claimed that the incident involving the Tic Tac had lasted 4 or 5 minutes. Now, the biggest issue with this testimony is that his wingman, Lieutenant Commander Dietrich, does not agree with his recollection of the incident. So this is back during that time frame. I think it was either 2020 or 21, something like that. 2021, June of 2021. She sets out a series of tweets about all this stuff because some people had reached out to her and asked her. And she said in the tweet, quote, "Yeah, we were visual for about 8 to 10 seconds, then it disappeared instantly. Not like it took 8 to 10 seconds to disappear. That would have been weird." In a follow-up, she said, "You'll have to ask him to clarify, but what I hear him describe here is a shorter, less than 20-second engagement with the Tic Tac itself. It definitely wouldn't take 5 minutes for him to descend from altitude and cut across the circle, meaning the area in which this thing was flying." And then it continues on. "We had radar contact via the Princeton for 5 minutes. We had visual contact for 8 to 10 seconds after the pilot merge." So the pilot merge plot is when you have where the Princeton, which is one of the radar ships that they have, that's part of the Nimitz group. Once they got into the area that the Princeton had on its radar system, the two radar systems, meaning the one from the ship and the one from the plane, those two things would sync up. So that's what she's talking about when she says merge plot. So 8 to 10 seconds after merge plot. 5 minutes would have been a lifetime for visual and dogfighting. You would run out of fuel. You're not speaking our language. So in the long run, what she's talking about here is they were both there, both saw the same exact thing at the same exact time. And if you go back and you take a look at the initial reports, so the initial paperwork that was filled out after this incident, things change over time. So maybe Commander Fravor, remembered things a little bit differently. Now, one of the things that we point to is BASS, BAASS, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Study. So there are documents that were done, and when Fravor was initially questioned, and I'm trying to remember the year that this was done, I think it was in 2004. So anyway, this information has been leaked. It's one of many things that's being leaked. If the paperwork is authentic, all they do is further bolster the idea that Commander Fravor, he misremembers what had happened and kind of how it happened. So what is it? It's a 140-page report that presents the first documented account of the 2004 event. It includes Fravor's initial report and Chad Underwood's initial report. The report shows that their stories have changed drastically since 2004. What I would do is I would encourage you to look at the information for yourself. It can be found on reddit.com and is posted by a person called Cosmo Seeker, CosmoSeeker 2030. So Cosmo Seeker 2030. And it's entitled Summary Report on BASS UAP Analysis Capabilities. So again, misremember. You don't want to say this guy's being he's trying to mislead people. You're just talking about that. He's basically misremembering something that occurred. Maybe his memory, like I said, it's been influenced over time by all these other stories, and he kind of went back and did a little bit of an edit in his own mind as to what may have happened. Now, the next guy I have is Ryan Graves. He is also U.S. Navy pilot. He is retired. He's a former F-18, so just like Fravor, just like Dietrich, and he was stationed on the East Coast of the United States. This is most likely you're familiar with, or hopefully you're familiar with what they refer to as the Roosevelt incident. So one of his first claims is that he had seen hundreds of UFOs every day from 2014 to 2015. One of the things that we have to point out is he never actually saw them. So he reports seeing these things but it wasn't with his own eyes. It was with the radar returns, most of which could have been Mylar balloons. So 2024 Aero does the report, and it found that 70% of identified cases were balloons. And if I remember correctly, they were able to, I'm trying to remember which university it was. University did a study, and what they were studying was how many balloons would wash up on the shore of the East Coast. So we're talking like Virginia Beach, we're talking beaches in North Carolina, and so on. Now, one of the things we need to point out is that the Navy updated their radar systems, and that these things are, as I said before, capable of detecting metal objects the size of a baseball. And these returns are always out of eyesight of these objects. We're talking 50, 60, up to 100 miles away. There's no way that you can see these things. Yeah, you can use cameras, you can use thermal cameras, all this stuff, but from that distance, you're not going to be able to see anything. That's why things show up bloppy, because you cannot discern actual shape based upon that, especially if it's like a commercial aircraft and it's got a jet engine on it. The heat plume that it gives off is going to have that blobby, roundish sort of shape to it, and you're never going to be able to identify what these things actually are, at least not from that far away.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break here and listen to some horrible reviews with my buddy and yours, Edgegrave Dave, with his experience at the Brighton Asylum. Let's go, Edgegrave!
Horrible reviews with Edgegrave Dave.
Well, guys, it's finally happened. Edgegrave Dave has been thrown right into the crazy house. Right into the asylum. The Brighton Asylum, that is. And did I go kicking and screaming? Well, actually, I took myself there, a buddy, and even a close family member, all the way into the Passaic County area of New Jersey to the Brighton Asylum. New Jersey's, as they say, scariest Halloween attraction for the past 13 years. And I even stopped at White Castle on the way. I went to what many do consider at least the scariest attraction in New Jersey. And upon further reading into this, the Brighton Asylum not only has been an awesome haunted attraction since 2011, it's actually a real place. That's right. Just go to the Brighton Asylum website, which is brightonasylum.com, and there's some pretty interesting backstory about this as follows. And yes, as my buddy Bill and my daughter would agree, White Castle certainly does help before doing this. Not that this is any kind of a cheap plug, but hey, if you don't eat the fries and the onion rings, you can have even more burgers. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? So upon driving under an hour from my own crypt, Brighton Asylum, as it says, is New Jersey's most visited Halloween destination for over 13 years. As it says, commit your Scream Squad to the Brighton Asylum this fall. Experience 3 award-winning haunted houses, live entertainment, immersive escape rooms, larger-than-life photo experience, their Monster Midway arcade, their Carnival games, horror museum, an escape room, and a gift shop. I just love that right there. Well, I'm going to tell you guys right off the bat, due to the lines, the gift shop wasn't open at the time. The axe throwing did look pretty cool, as it was sort of like glow in the dark, and I didn't really get to check out the Carnival games or the escape room, but they have all different packages on there. Basically, once you're driving down, you're going to see a series of buildings. Some of them look like industrial buildings. Some of them are abandoned. And then you kind of come to this courtyard. And this is the very courtyard that the actual asylum is in. When you go there, you could either purchase the tickets either online or you can go right to the ticket window. And just to let you guys know, they do only accept cash, and there is an ATM waiting for you in one of the buildings. But of course, when you go to the ATM, you'll see other people running out, as there is a chainsaw fellow that's kind of getting you at the very end. Choose either a fast pass, which will get you just a little bit past some of the people, or you can go online, let it wrap around, and chill out to some of the tunes like Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses. We had a cool remix of the Halloween soundtrack, Marilyn Manson's The Beautiful People, and many others. So you can kind of rock along while that fog is blasting in your face. So what's the deal with a lot of people giving their reputation of this being one of the scariest haunted houses in all of New Jersey? Well, you see, the Brighton Asylums complex really is that series of industrial and old buildings, decrepit warehouses. Just the atmosphere of it is very different than going to a farm, which I usually love doing and doing the whole hayride. This is the actual building itself is very interesting. You see, this back in as early as the mid 1940s was really housing for the mentally unstable and for the psychologically damaged, as it said. Many of these patients were quite violent. It says that they often needed to be isolated for staff and patient protection. The most violent patients were housed in the main central building. This is commonly referred to the actual Brighton Asylum. They did have minimal risk patients. This was a complex, as I said, but above the Brighton Asylum on the second floor, that's the staff headquarters, where most of them actually lived and they were on duty. They housed nurses, doctors, orderlies, administrators, you name it, lab technicians. But after years of harsh living conditions, grotesque medical experiments, staff disappearances, and screams, it says, it shut down in 1952. And this did pend a full investigation, but there were no results that could be found to date. After 59 years of sitting unexposed, decaying, and cut off from the public, it says, the Brighton Asylum reopened in 2011 as a haunted attraction. How about that? Just knowing that itself is a precursor to what's to come. Or is it? I can tell you right off the bat that the three haunted houses are somewhat rolled into one. You go through the complex and it looks like from the outside that you do go up on the second floor. You really do get to go through the whole building. And then with the third one, you're kind of outside and you go back in again. You won't really recognize the actual asylum part itself, or at least how it used to look, because everything is dressed up in a very elaborate set design. I thought this was quite impressive, but there's a lot of stairs, and with the black light that's inside, you'll be able to see the tape so that you could watch your footing. And if you do rush through, and this does go through for any haunted attraction, please don't run and really try not to rush, because you can fall and you can get hurt. And also, you don't want to miss anything. But the elaborate set designs, you had like an operating room that really went wrong. You have a lot of animatronics, and some of these animatronics could actually be people. So you never know what you're going to see. There's a haunted library. I really did enjoy that with a librarian. And we did actually have some words with her, and it is a library after all, so she does want you to be quiet. There was a whole satanic church type scene. You have a whole actual haunted house itself part with complete with a dining room, the sort of abandoned look to it. And one of my favorite parts of it, there's a lot of like forest atmospheric type of branches and things, almost like something out of Stranger Things, believe it or not. And this really cool part, you have this fog coming in with this green light that gives an illusion like you're almost underwater, and the fog's almost up to your neck, and you're almost wondering, is this water? Is this fog? What is this? Because you kind of forget that you're inside of something, and you really feel like you're outside in the elements. And the actors do a really great job. They really get into it. There's a huge focus on doctors and zombies, stuff like that. But we went on what was called Slasher Thursdays. There were like a handful of slasher type characters, Leatherface type character from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or at least similar. But you do get a little bit of, well, Freddy Krueger happens to be in there. And that was really fast, maybe with the pace that we were going. But I did notice, and this is pretty common, as you're going, you are going to catch up to the other people. So some of the jump scares could be designed for maybe smaller individual groups. That really goes for anywhere that you go. It could oftentimes be tough. It was definitely worth it. The time spent, I would say that you'll probably go through the whole thing in maybe about 20 minutes, depending on your pace, maybe longer, maybe a full half an hour might be possible. Was it the absolute scariest? Well, that's really tough to say. I mean, the building itself is very impressive and very scary, and I think that the actors did a great job. There were certain parts that actually did get old Edgegrave Dave, and that did sort of jump scare me. It's very easy to be desensitized if you do a lot of these things, but there are portions of it that separate itself from other ones. And I do love those farms. I do love hay rides, things like that, but it's very refreshing to see something a little bit different. You want to bundle up when you get there. You don't know if it's going to be hot or cold. You're definitely going to be standing outside for a little portion of it. When we came out of there, we felt like we accomplished something. And that's always the feeling that I personally want to get. Nothing was really cheapened about it. And we felt great coming out of there. For some people, maybe, I thought it was definitely one of the most different, one of the most best ones. I think it's definitely cool to check out. And another note that I do want to say is, according to the website, they have other themed non-Halloween haunts as well, like Santa's sleigh. There's a Dark Valentine one, and also a St. Patrick's Day haunt, which I think is really cool. They only have select dates for those around Halloween time. You can pretty much pick a day in late September, and October is always open, so plan accordingly, and you might be able to do these other awesome things too as they pop up. So Ghost Joe, if you ever get a chance to check this out, I think that it's pretty cool and pretty enjoyable. So keep enjoying the spooky season, and it's always the spooky season here on the Warp Reality Paranormal Podcast. All right, Edgegrave Dave, spreading some more fear. Take care, guys.
Thank you, Edgegrave, for that tantalizing review. As always, thank you. And I'm going to have to check that place out, man. I love checking out these haunted places, even though I don't really get out much, and I don't really get around. Well, I really don't get around anywhere at all. It's sad. Anyway, enough about me. Let's get back to John Wright's awesome coverage on UFOs. But first, he's going to talk about something serious that had happened to him, in between these show segments that he had done. And I encourage you guys to listen because it's very important, and it's a very important message. And here we go. Back to some John Wright.
I'm going to do like a mini public service announcement here. A lot of things happened health-wise for members of my family. My mom had a mini stroke. My son had to go in for colon cancer surgery. And it's the surgery that I had to have about 13 years ago. We have this genetic condition called FAP. My daughter also has it. So 3 of the 4 members of my family. And basically what it is a genetic disorder that does not allow your body to suppress tumor growth. So if you have it, there's a 100% chance that you will have colon cancer. So for the last 13 and a half years, we've been patients at Memorial Sloan Kettering down in the city. And I cannot say enough about the staff and the surgeons, Dr. Weiser, his team, and all the other people that are involved in it. What they do is just amazing work. The only reason why I know about this condition, and the only reason why I'm sitting here talking to you right now, is because my wife bugged the shit out of me when I was 39 years old to go get a colonoscopy. There's a history of Crohn's disease in my family, and I was having some issues, and my wife was like, just go get it done, blah, blah, blah. I was like, all right, fine. I'll go get it done if it's going to shut you up and you're going to leave me alone. Went in for the procedure, and we found out that I had some serious issues. Anyway, the doctor recommends that we contact the people down at Memorial Sloan, and the rest of it is history. Prior to me going in and having the surgery actually done 13 years ago, Dr. Weiser looked at me and he said, turn to your wife and say thank you. And I looked at him, I go, huh? And he goes, turn to your wife and say thank you. Because if she didn't bug the shit out of you enough that you would go and get the colonoscopy, he goes, you would start having symptoms in about 2 years. And here's the problem. If you start having symptoms, it's too late. There would have been nothing I could do for you. You would have come into this office, and my words to you would have been, I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, this is too far gone. There's nothing I can do for you. So for anybody out there who suffers from any type of digestive tract issues, I would recommend go get a colonoscopy, get scoped for this, because the problem is there are no symptoms whatsoever for this particular condition. And you'd want to get yourself checked out, have your kids checked out. So if you do have this condition, immediately get your family checked out. Now, enough about that. One of the things I did find, and as I went looking, I was able to find some other information. Now, he claimed at some point that he had seen a sphere with a cube inside of it. Now, most people say, oh, this is like alien stuff. It's these weird high-tech probes and all these other things. And I thought it was very interesting that I was able to dig up some stuff. Now, Tyler Rogoway, he's a guy who works for TWZ.com, thewarzone.com. He published an article in 2019, and it says, are some of the UFOs Navy pilots are encountering actually airborne radar reflectors? So one of the things that they talk about is that when they were seeing these things weren't showing up on radar. And one of the things that Tyler Rogoway was able to find was there are actual patents. And I wish I could show you guys the picture. So I encourage you to go online, look at these articles. And what he found was the Navy has a patent for a radar jamming device that matches the exact description of what Graves was able to give. Now, here's the funny part. These radar jammers actually date back to the 1940s, the mid to late 1940s. It's basically what looks like a tinfoil cube, but it's not necessarily a cube. It's basically two squares perpendicular to one another, making a diamond shape, if that helps. And what they did was they put these things inside balloons. So rather than dangle it from a balloon from a string, which could break, they actually inflated the balloon with the radar target inside of it. And they could release these things. Super cheap to make, super easy to set up and release. And what it would do, it would spoof enemy radars. And so these things will move at whatever speed they're going to move, the wind speeds and all that stuff. Now, it goes on to talk about in 2020, Chinese radar jamming devices were detected off the coast of Virginia and Florida. So if we have these things that are showing up, they're potentially metal, then you're going to get tons and tons of hits. Now, why would they want to do this? Why would the Chinese release these balloons with the radar deflectors in there, or radar targets in there? So they're doing it maybe, and I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm going to call it my somewhat educated guess. They're trying to figure out how sophisticated our systems are so that this way they can find out what it is that we can detect, and more importantly, what can't we detect. Now, this article was written by Alex Ward and Lara Seligman, and it was in the Politico, and this showed up in February of 2023. So I would encourage you to look that one up. And Representative Mike Walsh, who's a Republican from Florida, and he's also a member of the House Armed Services Committee, so he's involved with this stuff. He confirmed this basically in a tweet, and he said several Chinese balloon incidents have happened in the past few years, including Florida. Now, right off the coast of Florida, not too far away, big incident back in the 60s, Cuba. The Chinese are actually setting up bases, spy bases in Cuba. 3 of them have been confirmed, and it's believed that there could potentially be up to 12 of these bases located throughout China. Well, that's not too far from Florida, folks. They can send out a boat, could be make it look like a commercial boat, what have you. You got these balloons on there. What do? You release them so that they go past, and you get an idea, and you can kind of harass our systems and all the other stuff that goes with it. The next guy I'm going to talk about is David Grush. Now, I know you've heard me talk about him before, and I'm going to come back to it. Who is he? He's a former Air Force, and he's retired. He worked for what is called the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He was also a liaison to the National Reconnaissance Office and for the UAP Task Force. Now, when you go through, you take a look at this, he makes all kinds of claims. One of the first claims that he makes is that aliens and alien craft have been recovered for 90 years. He uses what he refers to as the Magenta Crash as his proof of it existing for 90 years, which supposedly occurred in 1933, which is a load of garbage. Originally, it's mentioned in, meaning the Magenta Crash is going to be mentioned in the MJ-12 papers, the Majestic 12. It was just a short blurb that was in there. And then what happens is later on that stuff comes out and you're not going to see anything about it again until I think it was early 2003. When a gentleman by the name of William P. Brophy writes a series of letters to Flying Saucer Review. His brother, Sean, disputes William's claims. And Sean refers to his brother as eccentric. So you take that for what it is. I think there's a lot there. I'm just going to leave it at that. Just keep moving along here. Second claim that he makes is that he did tell Kirkpatrick, former director of the UAP or Arrow, that he had seen all this stuff, the information that had been presented to him and everything else. And when Kirkpatrick and Arrow were being slammed by Congress and all these other people about the horrible job that they were doing, Kirkpatrick writes this letter and he posted it on his LinkedIn page. And one of the things that he states is, contrary to assertions made in the hearing, the central source of those allegations refuses to speak to Arrow. Well, who's the central source of the allegations? That would be David Grush. Now, David Grush also claims people have been hurt and killed to cover up the conspiracy. When asked at the congressional hearing about people being killed to cover up conspiracy, he refuses to answer the question. So in podcasts and interviews on News Nation, he had no problem answering that question. When he's sworn in and he's talking to the public, he doesn't say a word. Why? Because he's under oath. If he lies under oath, he's going to be in trouble. What I would suggest you do is, and you've probably heard me mention this before, read Adam Gorightly's Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks. Very few stories other than Dulce Base are going to fit into some of the things that these guys are talking about in regards to underground bases, people being kind of bullied and silenced and that sort of stuff. The other thing that I throw out here is the Forrestal, quote unquote, suicide. In 1949, he was the Secretary of Defense, and a lot of conspiracy theories are going to say that he didn't kill himself, that he was thrown out the window to silence him so that this way he couldn't do any of these other things and make a big deal out of it, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe the gentleman just killed himself and that's the end of it. Number 4, he claims that the 1970s SALT conference, strategic arm limitation, in the 70s is like 70 through, I think it was 1973, something like that. They were done to satisfy non-human intelligences. He goes on to say that Article 3 of the agreement is done to justify that the claim that the aliens were kind of behind this and that the Russians and the Americans did this not because they wanted to prevent, nuclear catastrophe, but they did it because of the simple fact that they wanted to avoid any type of repercussions that might come from what he refers to as the NHI, or the non-human intelligences. Now, what does Article 3 say? It says the parties undertake to notify each other immediately of unidentified objects. So the question is, why would you want to do this? So he's saying it's because they want to avoid any type of conflict with aliens. And I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe it's to avoid nuclear launch. Or here's an even better one. You put it in writing that if you see something weird, you're going to tell me. If I see something weird, I'm going to tell you. Well, if you're running these clandestine operations like, the B-2 bomber, the SR-71 Blackbird, all these different things, you see something, they tell you that they saw something, but they're not quite sure what it is. that gives you a really good idea of whether or not your program's actually working. So if they don't see it, they don't say anything, then maybe they don't know about it. If they do see it, well, wow, what did it look like? Was it like this? Was it like that? Blah, 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 blah. Now you get to find out, okay, they were able to detect or what have you, or maybe they just saw it with their eyes, but couldn't detect it on some type of equipment. Okay, it's working, but we need to tweak some things along the way here. As I've said in the past, I truly believe that David Drush was a guy that was fed a lot of information. And in the end, I don't think he's a liar. I think he's just telling you what these other people have basically told him. Now, as far as, let me get to the point here. Why do I have such an issue with anecdotal evidence? As I said before, memory is fallible. Emory University did a survey on the Challenger explosion, so the space shuttle explosion. And so these professors, what they did was immediately the day that had occurred, they sat down with their students and they had their students write down a summary of what had occurred that day, what they had done, all these other things. Now, years later, they wind up contacting those students because they want to see, are their memories now the same as what it was, or their memory of what had occurred and how it occurred? Is it the same now as it was during that time frame back in the 80s when the space shuttle had exploded? And what they wound up finding, they only were able to contact, I think it was roughly about 40 or 44 of those students in a total of, I think it was 200 students total. So out of that, they were only able to find a small number of them. And every single one of them wound up looking at the information that they had written down at that time. And they said, oh, I didn't write this. None of them could recognize what it was that they had written. And then they started to say, somebody else must have written this. Oh, you lost my stuff because here's how I remember it. And every single one of them was wrong. They misremembered what it was that happened. And they had written it down at that time. And over time, their memory of how those things occurred changed. Now, even highly trained, and I love when people throw that shit out there. Oh, he's an officer, so he's highly trained. Oh, he's a pilot. He's highly trained. He's in the military. He's highly trained. I got news for you. I've met people that are cops. I've met people that are doctors. I've met people that are in the military, and God bless them for what they do. But some of them are not the best and the brightest. That's all I got to say here. Now, I was able to find this video on space.com, and this is about astronaut Scott Kelly. He was at this press conference that NASA had done, and they'd asked him, or somebody, one of the people in the audience had asked him if he could give them some information on how hard it is to identify things. And I'm going to try and pull this video up and play it for you, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here. I think make a couple of comments to just follow up on what Josh said. And my experience of flying, over 15,000 hours, 30-something years in airplanes and both in space, and the environment that we fly in, space or, an atmospheric flight, very, very conducive to optical illusions. So I get it, why these pilots would look at that go fast video and think it was going really, really fast. I remember one time I was flying in the warning areas off of Virginia Beach military operating area there. And my Rio thought, the guy who sits in the back of the Tomcat, was convinced we flew by a UFO. So I didn't see it. We turned around. We went to go look at it. It turns out it was Bart Simpson, a balloon. Oftentimes in space, I would see things and I was like, oh, that's really not behaving like it should. It doesn't have the trajectory of a satellite or a planet on the back of the star field. And every single time when I would look at it long enough, I would realize that it was atmospheric lensing. It was the fact that what I was looking at was actually flying behind the atmosphere. And because of variations in the atmosphere, it made the trajectory look like it wasn't going in a straight line. It was going like this and then go like that, and it would turn in the other direction. Was always the case. My brother, Mark Kelly, a former NASA astronaut and also now a U.S. Senator. I was with him for dinner last night, and he shared a story with me again that he had shared years ago, but I had kind of forgotten about it, and I think it's worth sharing. And that is when he was the commander of STS-124, I think it was, in 2008. They were getting ready to close the payload bay doors of the space shuttle. And before they do that, you got to make sure nothing interferes with the doors, because if the doors don't close properly, the space shuttle can't re-enter the atmosphere. It would come apart. It's a part of the structural integrity of the vehicle. So they see something in the payload bay, and they thought it was a tool, maybe a bolt. They couldn't quite figure it out. They were potentially going to have to go and do a spacewalk to retrieve it. But before they did that, my brother grabbed the camera. They took a picture of it. And when they blew up the picture, they realized that this is not a bolt or a tool in the payload bay. It was actually the International Space Station that was 80 miles away. I mean, that's just a really good example of how this environment we operate in is so conducive to optical illusions. Oftentimes, guys fly into the water. And there are cases where, pilots have rendezvoused on a buoy because they thought that was their wingman. It's just very, very challenging environment to work in, especially at night. And in my experience, the sensors kind of have the same issues as the people's eyeballs.
So if you're going to talk highly trained, I think it doesn't get any more highly trained than a NASA astronaut. And I think that kind of says everything in regards to that topic. Next up, one of the things I love is you got this guy, Avilo, professor at Harvard and astronomer, all this other stuff. Guy is outstanding. Now, I know he does make some crazy claims, but here's what I love about him. He's willing to do things that other people won't do. He's willing to say things other people won't do in the hopes that it kind of opens this up. Because in academia, you have a lot of professors, PhDs, who are kind of uptight about the topic, don't want to take it seriously, or don't want to get involved in it because of any possible repercussions in regards to grants and those types of things. And this guy is putting himself on the front line, and he is like the face, the target of all these things. And what does he say? We need real evidence, not what people say. So again, that's kind of where I'm at. Now, the question is, does the anecdotal evidence have an impact? So I did some research. One of the things that I found was a survey that was done by National Geographic. And this was back in June 27 of 2012. It was published by abcnews.go.com. And it was entitled, UFOs Exist, say 36% of the people in this survey. There were 1,114 people that were surveyed, and they were all over the age of 18. The survey was conducted in advance of a series done by National Geographic that was called Chasing UFOs. It asked some serious questions. It also asked some not so serious questions. One of the questions, I thought this hilarious, so I included this in here. Who would handle an alien invasion better, Mitt Romney or Barack Obama? 65% of the people that were surveyed voted for Barack Obama. So I did some more research, and the next one was referred to as Americans Skeptical of UFOs but Say Government Knows More. So this was September 6th, 2019, and it was published by news.gallup.com. This surveyed 1,018 people, and they were all over the age of 18. They were able to compare this with a previous survey that was done in 1996. Now, they do some comparisons, but here's the problem. I couldn't find the original 1996, so I can only go based off of the information that they have. And it says, the one question says, in your opinion, does the U.S. government know more about UFOs than it is telling? So it shows in 1996, 71% that voted in this 96 survey said yes. 19% said no, and 10% had no opinion. 2019, 68% of the people that participated said yes, 29% said no, and then 2% said they had no opinion on this. So again, you can see there's definitely an influence there. So now, fast forward a little bit. This next one was called Most Americans Believe Life on Other Planets Exists. And this was done through a group called pewresearch.org, P-E-W research.org. This was published June 30th of 2021. Now, if you're going to do a survey, this is how you go about doing a survey. They had 10,417 people take part in this survey, all over the age of 18. The survey asks a lot of questions. It was like 25, 28 questions. It includes demographic breakdown like age, ethnicity, education levels, socioeconomic status, those types of things. So this thing was pretty detailed. Now, what I wanted to do was like a comparison of the three different surveys. So the one in 2012, you have 36.7% of the people believed that UFOs existed. In 2019, you have 33% that believe UFOs and aliens are real. Then in 2021, 51% believe that military reports are proof of aliens. Another comparison between the 2012 and 2019, 2012, 10% of the people that were surveyed spotted a UFO, which accumulated to somewhere around 111 of the people said that they had seen a UFO. That jumps up in 2019 to 16%, which goes up to over 160 people believing that they had seen a UFO. One of the most important statistics that I think that came out of this, because again, I can compare the 2019 and the 21 surveys, is over 2.5% times likely. People who did not have a college education and came from low-income households were 2.5 times more likely to believe in and report UFOs. Meaning that people who that had education and all this other stuff and came from better backgrounds, more information, greater exposure, were less likely to report these things. So in the end, we definitely see an uptick. And again, I'd love to do like a survey about, was it in 2017 when the whole unidentified came out with Lou Elizondo and all that stuff, is that when this stuff really started to have that uptick. Final thoughts. Am I actually going to change people's minds? Maybe this presentation will, or maybe it won't. My hope is that this is going to encourage people to think more critically about the information that is being presented on a topic and to do their own research. Don't just take it blindly. In the end, I believe we all have the same goal in mind, which is to try and figure out what this thing is. So hopefully in the end, we can come to some sort of conclusion, and maybe at some point we'll eventually come to some sort of agreement on what it actually is. But until then, I won't hold my breath. Joe, guys, back to you. Thanks a lot.
All right, so thank you guys for checking out this bonus episode of Season 6, the first one, of course. And thank you to John Wright. Thank you to Edgegrave Dave for your awesome contributions. I love you guys as always. And yeah, man, next week, back to our regularly scheduled programming. We have a Halloween episode coming up that's going to knock your socks off. Well, I hope. And we also have an awesome interview that we had done with the amazing Preston Dennett. You're not going to want to miss that one. Also, we have plenty of stuff coming up as well, too. Please check out all of our socials, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all that great stuff. Check all that out and subscribe, why don't you? And also, if you have a paranormal experience you'd like to share, questions, comments, or you'd like to be a guest in the show, that's exactly what I say at the end. Anyway, you could do so at 845-600-0744. You could email me at ghostjoeny@gmail.com, or you could go to our awesome website at warpedrealityparanormal.com. It's awesome, man. You could hear all of the old episodes, You could check out paranormal news from everywhere, which is pretty freaking awesome because they don't have a lot of sites that do that, but we do. Okay, so check that out. You could also submit your stories, your experiences there as well, and you could do it anonymously if you want. So please check all of that out, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Have a great one. Later, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Warp Reality Paranormal Podcast, and thank you to all of my guests and contributors that help make this show possible. If you have a paranormal experience you'd like to share, questions, comments, or you'd like to be a guest in the show, please leave me a voicemail at 845-600-0744, or you can email me at ghostjoeny@gmail.com. You can do so anonymously if you'd like. Also, please check out our show notes for all social media links of this show and some of our friends. The Warp Reality Paranormal Podcast, uncovering the unseen.